It's a slippery slope, right? So as soon as you give that control over to somebody, they want more and it just kind of goes down. And in some ways it's like that frog in the boiling pot. Like it doesn't happen instantly, right? It's not some oppressive government takes over. It's kind of a slow burn, and a lot of people don't realize it's happening and they're like, oh, that's okay, that's just that. Oh, that's okay, that's just that. And then more and more, and it builds, and then eventually you're boiled alive.
This is the future.
Hello and welcome to the Alternate Futures podcast, where we chat with indie sci-fi creators about their work, the world, and anything in between, or beyond. Today I'm here with Brent Golembiewski. Brent is a U.S. Air Force veteran, retiring after 20 plus years of service. He started his career as an enlisted airman, working as an electronic warfare technician. His first duty station was Shaw Air Force Base, South Carolina, where he picked up his nickname G, coming by way of G11, an abbreviation of his last name. After retiring from the USAF, he began Valkyrie, which provides aircraft charter operations, before deciding to take a crack at writing science fiction. To date, he's written the Flat Earth Trilogy, Book 1 of the Central Fire series, and Social Score. Hi, Brent. Thanks for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate you having me.
So you're not the first U.S. Forces personnel we've had on this show,
Sure.
but you might be the first electronic warfare technician. I'm just wondering if you could sort of walk us through what that means and what your
Sure.
responsibilities
Yeah,
are.
so it's kind of a funny story for that. I mean, I could bore you with stories all day, especially with my Air Force career, but decided that I wanted to get out of the house and join the Air Force. And we won't get into the specifics of that. But when I went to the recruiter, this was back before the internet, so I had no idea what different jobs were and whatnot. So the recruiter would try to sell you on what jobs you thought you would be good for you. And you took an ASVAB test that would rank you in mechanical score, electronics, like English, a whole bunch of other different fields. And they would try to match you the best with what you had. Well, my electronic score and my mechanical score were relatively high. I'm just really hands-on kind of guy and understand how that kind of stuff works. And so we were going through the book and he looked at it and he's like, oh, this one's pretty good. And it's kind of right up your alley. It's called Electronic Warfare. And he reads the blurb to me because that's all I know, and says, yeah, you'll be working on stealth technology and making sure aircraft aren't seen in the sky and all that stuff. And he's like, oh, this sounds like you'd be working on the B-2, or back then they had the F-117. And I was like, oh, that sounds kind of cool. And at the time, I just kind of wanted to get out of the house. So I was like, well, okay, yeah, that sounds good. Let's do it. So, I go into basic thinking that's what's going to happen. Get out of basic, go to Keesler, Mississippi, which is where the tech school was. And then I find out what it's really about. So electronic warfare, it's not necessarily stealth technology. So I ended up working on the F-16. And what it was we worked on the ECM pod, electronic countermeasures pod. So the ALQ-184. And so what that does is it jams enemy radar, hence the stealth technology. So I was working on a pod that would jam enemy radar at Shaw. Their mission at the time was SEAD, suppression of enemy air defenses is what it stood for. So they'd be the first one in, they'd take out all the SAM sites, and then everyone else would flow in after that in a traditional war setting. And so that's what the ECM was for. That's what it stands for. And that's kind of what I was working on. So a lot of electronics, a lot of chasing wires, electrical cards. I think there was 52 circuit cards inside of that pod. And so some of them would fry out, or, you'd be troubleshooting and you have to swap those out. And there's a lot of stuff going on, and, basically be radiating those SAM sites. The only thing that was really classified was like the frequencies you used, but it would do different things. Like it would create mirages. It would make it look like there was like 5 F-16s in the air instead of just one. And so the radar would lock onto the wrong ones. And so there's a lot of that kind of technology is what I was working on.
So were you interested in military aircraft at all before that? Or it was just, like you said, I just wanted something to do
Yeah.
out there?
Like I said, my career has been kind of crazy. So in high school, I said I'd never enlist, right? The Marines were high on me. I was an athlete, played ice hockey, football, basketball, baseball, all varsity sports on that. And so I always said I'd never join. But then, like as a teenager, you kind of have some struggles with the parents, right? And you're like, I need to get out of this house. College just didn't stick. I did a semester at Ferris State University, and I was like, I just don't like the college scene and whatnot. My dream when I was a little kid, and still when I was trying to go to high school or college, was I wanted to be a Disney animator, right? So I was really into art and, doing that. But at the same time, I didn't want to go too far from home. So I ended up kind of staying closer, and I was studying graphic design instead.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so I did that, and then kind of decided I really didn't like the college scene. And so, I just got out of that and was living at home, working at Sam's Club, and my parents weren't real happy with me, and I was kind of frustrated. So girlfriend at the time, her mother decided, to give me some advice and say, hey, why don't you join the military? And so that's when I decided to join. And so went in just to really get away from the house, and get away and kind of start my own life and whatnot. And then things, just they go all over the place, right? You never know where you're gonna go. And doors opened up to me. Ended up working with a couple individuals that were in charge of me. And when I was working on electronic warfare, and they saw kind of my work ethic, I got attached to a couple special programs where we had this special, we called it the Crow Cart, and it was based on the RWR system, the radar warning receiver system. And so we were identifying that 95% of the F-16s had failures with that system, with this new electronics cart that we had. So we would go around to different bases, and I would be briefing the generals on what we were doing and what we were finding and stuff. So it really put me in the spotlight there. And then the two individuals that were in charge of me were going to night school for college, and were trying to become officers. And they kind of took me under their wing and said, hey, you follow us, you can kind of go do the officer thing too. And, the pay's better. So I kind of followed them. I just did what they told me to do and went to night school and got my bachelor's through Embry-Riddle, a esteemed aeronautics school down in Florida, but it was all remote learning. And so I got my bachelor's degree. It's kind of fun because I like to say I finished my bachelor's degree in a year, because I actually did, because they were 6-week mini masters and I was taking the full load I could, working full time. I was able to use some good programs back at the time where the last semester I got to stop working and just finish my classes full time. So that was a good program the Air Force had. And then I applied to officer training school. And then that was when my commander at the time pulled me into his office. And, here I was a young airman, and I'm thinking, oh man, what did I do wrong? And, I was thinking about all the things I did. And so when you fill out your forms, you have to put like your dream sheet, like your jobs that you want. And so I put logistics and space and missile and something else. And because I just wanted to get out of the maintenance space. And so he's a maintenance officer. So I'm like, oh, maybe he's disappointed in me for not putting maintenance officer, So he pulls me in and is like, okay, I want to talk about you applying for OTS. And I'm sitting there shaking in my boots, right? So I got this major talking to me, and I'm just a, 3-striper at the time. And so he says, okay, I like your work ethic. You're doing really well, but you really need to think about what you want to do. And he's like, he puts his hand in the air and he says, okay, this is where officers are. And then he puts a hand above that. He says, this is where pilots are. He's like, you want to be a pilot. And he's like, I think you have what it takes. And, he kind of talked me into it. So I had never really even thought of flying before that, which, it's one of those things where some kids dream of it. And I was just like, I thought it was out of reach, right? I wasn't Maverick from Top Gun or anything like that. So I ended up applying for that and ended up becoming a pilot after that. So it was kind of a surreal experience, At the same time, it was great though, because you're like hands-on. So it's not just sitting at a computer or managing systems or, being a maintenance officer and making sure everything's running right and whatnot. I got to actually, fly things, and so that was a great experience. And it was really up my alley, and it worked out. So God had a plan for me. That was for sure.
Yeah, there's a good promotion clip for the Air Force there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, as a teen, I was always interested strangely in military aircraft for some reason. And F-16 was my favorite at the time. Of course, that was back in the 80s, so it was still fairly new at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One fun fact about an F-16 is if you have a slick F-16 without any armament on it or anything, the radar will pick it up as a bird because it has that small of a signature. The problem is once you load it with weapons, then it's like this big flying shoot at me kind of thing.
So what did you end up flying then once you became a pilot?
Yeah, I could spend hours on all this stuff. So I'll try to give you cliff notes. But through pilot training, you go through pilot training. At the time, they sent me through a little civilian airport because I had 0 flight hours. So they had me fly a Cessna 152 to get my private pilot's license. It's kind of like the way they weed out individuals who can't hack it, at the cheapest level. So I got through that, and then they send you through the first phase of pilot training. At the time, it was the T-37, the Tweet. So it was a little multi-engine jet trainer. So I did that at Columbus, Mississippi. And once you go through that, they rack and stack you based on how good you are in your class. So if you do really well in all the written tests and you fly really well and you have great knowledge, you're number one. And then the ones that are like barely making it are like the last one, right? And so I was kind of in the middle of the pack, and I kind of wanted to fly helicopters, which at the time was kind of like the redheaded stepchild of the Air Force. And like no one wanted it. It was like the bottom of the barrel, usually the last in the class. And so the rest of the class is all going for fighters, and they want to be, like I said, Tom Cruise, right? And Maverick. And so I told my class, I was like, well, I want helicopters. And so I became everybody's best friend at that point because I was not competing with them, right? And so I was middle of the pack. And at the time, like I said, the helicopters was kind of looked down upon. So I never really told my instructors. So my instructors finally found out, and exactly what happened was what I thought would happen. They tried to talk me out of it. They're like, you can't fly the airlines after that, like if you're a helicopter pilot, blah, blah. But I still wanted it. So I ended up getting helicopters. And then I went to Fort Rucker, Alabama, and flew the H model Hueys, a good old Vietnam Hueys, single engine, just like you see in Apocalypse Now. And then out of there, they rack and stack you and you get different helicopters from there. And so I really wanted the MH-53. They were doing special ops. They were dropping people in behind enemy lines, all that stuff. Sounded super, super cool, great mission and all that. But I was kind of in the middle of my pack again. And they only had one drop for there. So my second choice was Hueys. So I ended up flying Hueys the rest of my career. So the twin pack, so the 1N model. So the same thing as the H model, just has a second engine. And so that was kind of my career. I went around and had all sorts of different jobs, from being flight commander to safety officer, instructor, evaluator, kind of did all that stuff. So I had a pretty interesting career when it came to that. Got to do a lot of different things.
Did you ever get a chance to fly an Apache then?
No. So the Air Force doesn't have any attack helicopters.
Okay.
So that's actually kind of written into the regulations. So the Air Force isn't allowed to have attack aircraft, attack helicopters. We have attack airplanes. And it's kind of the opposite for the Army. The Army's not allowed to have attack planes, but they can have attack helicopters. So when it comes to helicopters, the Army's the one with all the attack capability. We just have
No.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I do have a fun story about weapons on our aircraft. So most of my career, I flew without weapons on the aircraft. We did missile support when I was in Minot and when I was at F.E. Warren. And so they would drive the nuclear weapons out to the silos when they had to do maintenance. So we'd have this nuclear warhead being driven back and forth from the base. And so we'd provide support, and we'd have security forces in the back with their weapons and all that stuff. Well, near the end of my career, they finally got approval to put M240s on the aircraft, just for a defensive capability. So when if someone were to try to steal the nuke, we could, go down and be able to provide a little bit of support for the ground troops. And so my very first flight, where we were going to go to the range and do live fire, we briefed everything. I'd done dry runs and, all the stuff that you do for training. And so we're flying out there, and in my mind, I'm like, I wonder what this is going to sound like, right? Like, I've never had a weapon fire on the aircraft before. And so we get to the range, and we get out there, and I'm the aircraft commander at the time. And so I, tell them, weapons free, when we're getting ready to fire. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, kind of like, Lego Batman or whatever. It's going to be like, pew, 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 right? Because it's just a 240. It's not like a 50 cal or any large weapon like that. So I turn into the bank, tell them weapons free. They just start unloading on the target. We had a couple like APCs that we got to shoot at and stuff, and it's just like boom, 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 and like it was so loud. It was like it kind of caught me off guard. I was like, wow, this is just like the movies. Like it was pretty crazy. I thought it was super cool. You just kind of hair stands out the back of your neck, just having all that firepower going out of
Yeah.
your aircraft. So it was pretty cool.
So I mean, we could talk about this for a while, to be honest. I
Oh
find it
yeah.
quite interesting as well. But to one more question on this regard is, so you met your wife in the Air Force as well. Is she still active? In your bio, it says she's
Yeah,
still
so
active.
she's actually retiring next week. So
Oh,
she's
okay.
done over 21 years. She was a lieutenant colonel, and she was commander of a couple, of the rescue squadron out at Fairchild Air Force Base here at the end. So yeah, she had a long, lengthy career, and we met. She was actually my first student, and so we could go into stories about that when I was at Minot.
We might want to
But
leave those ones alone. Yeah, because I
yeah,
was wondering what it's like having a partner who's on active duty, especially given the tensions these days. But fortunately, she's
yeah,
retiring, so maybe that's a good thing.
yeah. I mean, it was interesting. For the most part, it was great. Like people always worry about, having a spouse in the same unit as you or at the work site and all that stuff. But we had a really, really good relationship at work. We knew when to keep it professional and when we were at work, that was, I was Captain G and she was, the captain too, and so on and so forth. And then when we were at home, then we had our personal lives. I haven't seen the show Severance, but I kind of equate it to that. You have two
Okay.
different lives, and you kind of keep one thing one way and the other one another way.
Yeah. So from all your military experience, you did eventually decide to become a science fiction writer, which
Yes.
seems like a natural progression. No, not really. But so what was so what was your pathway there?
Yeah, so I ended up retiring and started my aircraft charter company during that time frame. But I had always kind of wanted to write. And when I did a year in Iraq, I had a lot of time there. So I started writing some short stories and just kind of having fun with that in my off time. And then when I got out, I was looking back at my career and said to myself, man, there's a lot of stuff that I really want to be able to pass on to the younger generation, kind of teach them some of my mistakes, some of my successes, what led me through my career. So I sat down to start writing my kind of memoirs, if you will. It's a self-help book. That one's called The Airman Blueprint. But I started writing that, but then I was like, well, I kind of had this idea at the time of this fun story, and that's where Flat Earth came out. At the time, I was kind of, Flat Earthers were kind of be coming out of the woodwork, and I was like, well, it'd be kind of fun to make a science fiction story. It kind of makes fun of them a little bit, where the Earth actually is flat. If you read the book, you'll figure it out. I wrote that one book and then it kind of morphed into a trilogy. I just kind of enjoyed writing. I was like, wow, this is fun, taking my creativity and adding all these things and, heavy sci-fi elements and military elements, like from combat and flying maneuvers and adding spacecraft. And it just seemed right up my alley. It was a lot of, they say, write what you know. And so it's a lot of that kind of stuff. And then eventually, after I wrote that, I went back and wrote, the Airman Blueprint and was able to publish that one as well. And kind of went down that road and really enjoyed the sci-fi realm. And so I've kept writing in the sci-fi realm. The Boy, the Cube, and the Elf series that we've kind of briefly talked about and you've highlighted. Social Score I wrote about a dystopian future, kind of oppressive government is kind of my ode to 1984. And then I also have another one called Flick of the Switch. So that's a young adult series that I'm working on publishing this fall. So that one's about done too. So that one's kind of a fun story too, all in the sci-fi realm.
So when you started writing science fiction, you knew that you were going to publish? It wasn't like something like, oh, I'm just writing this for myself and see what happens. You were pretty much set that, "Oh, I'm going to get these books out there then."
Yeah, so like I said, I started out with my Airman Blueprint, wanted to do that, and then switched over. And I was like, oh, at the time, it was kind of during COVID. And so I was doing a lot of research, and that was self-publishing really took off during that time. And I was like, oh man, how do I do this? And so I'm I did a lot of research, found out how to self-publish, went through Amazon and kind of did that route that a lot of us did during that time and was like, it was a little like nerve-wracking though, like how are people going to respond to this? Am I going to get terrible reviews? Like, how are things going to go? And so I reached out to family and friends and got them advanced reader copies and kind of went that route and found out, hey, the algorithm likes it if you get reviews. And so kind of did what a lot of authors did, asked them for reviews, gave them a book for free, and had them pay for a 99-cent copy on Amazon so they could get into it really cheap. And then kind of just went from there, got really good reviews. You send it to your mom and you're like, okay, well, she's gonna love everything that I do, right? And so then you send it to some other people and they start liking it, and you're like, oh, maybe I'm onto something. Like some acquaintances that I don't really know are giving me good reviews, then it's like, okay, because for me, if I don't like something, I might not necessarily tell you I don't like it, but I'm not going to give you a review. So there's a lot of people that just gave me great reviews and they didn't have to do that.
So, I mean, you write, is writing's your main sort of thing now then, or do you still run your
Yeah.
company as well?
Yeah, so I still run my company. It's just a small charter company. Right now we just have one. I've had up to three different aircraft on it. So, but right now we kind of downsized. I'm looking to kind of get out of that. I have a couple buyers, so I'm looking to sell the company, but we just have a PC-12 right now running out of Oregon. We're doing all the West Coast stuff. So it's been doing really well. But I just want to focus on my writing. I also coach ice hockey with my boys, and they're at a great age where I just want to be around them all the time before they
Right.
turn into total teenagers. So it's really fun. So I always joke, my wife really likes to work and she wants to keep flying and everything. So I'm the stay-at-home dad, so we kind of have reversed roles, which I'm completely fine with. We've been renovating our house, so that's been keeping me busy as well. I gutted the whole house and been building it all myself and having my dad help a little bit. So we're getting near the end of that, and I've been starting to focus, solely on writing and figuring out how to do some audiobooks. I have been dabbling in a whole bunch of other little things too. So
Amazon's just opened up their audiobook process. I've gotten some emails about it recently. They've invited me to join their audiobook creation stuff as well.
interested how that happens and how like works and how it sounds, right?
Yeah.
So with my flat earth, I went out and, I think it was through Upwork, I found somebody to do it for me and kind of had some fun with that. I actually had the female voices done by a female narrator and then the male voices and the main narration because it's from James's kind of perspective, if you will, with a different narrator. And so that was a fun process, but it was expensive.
Yeah.
And so interesting to see, Amazon's always trying to make it cheaper for you in the beginning, but obviously they take their pound of flesh so after
Yeah.
years. So
With the different people for doing different voices, did you do the editing to put it together then?
I didn't. So yeah, so Preston was my primary editor or my narrator. And so I had him do it and he's like, look, I'll cut everything and paste it together. And it was kind of fun. There was a few things that I didn't expect. The female narrator, there's some parts where they're flying in aircraft and spacecraft and stuff. And so she actually made it sound like she was in an aircraft when she was doing those responses and stuff like that. And so there was some pretty neat stuff, with it. And it was fun. At the same time, I'm just like, not 100%. Yeah, because I never, when I did that, I never listened to audiobooks. So I didn't know if it's good or how it'd be perceived and just kind of working through things.
Yeah, I think that audiobooks are at the beginning of a bit of an evolution as well. I mean, they've been with us for a little while, but I feel like partly with AI and partly with people just wanting to catch more of the market and make it sound more interesting, I think like a lot of the sort of ambient sound and things like that going to gradually move towards becoming audio plays almost so that
Yes.
they perform your book as opposed to
Yeah.
just narrating it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which is quite
And
fitting.
it is. It is. I didn't have any music or anything like that or sound effects, but I can definitely see that being the next progression. It's basically a movie without the pictures, right?
Yeah,
So just
exactly.
pure sound.
Yeah, because Audible itself, which is Amazon, of course, they produce some like that already. So if you haven't listened to it, the 1984, their version they've done is
Okay.
quite interesting. It is abridged in
Yeah.
that they add their own little bits of extra stuff, but it
Uh-huh.
does fit well, and they've had background sounds and everything.
Nice.
It really is truly an audio play. So that's a good one to check out if you ever have a
Okay. Yeah.
chance. So what would be your writing schedule? I'm curious because you do keep yourself fairly busy, it sounds like. So do you have a writing schedule, or you just sort of write when the spirit moves you?
It all depends on, what I'm doing. So there was a few months where I didn't write at all because I've been working on the house and doing other things. Before that, I would try to write an hour a night or so, just try to get 1,000 words down or something like that. Maybe a chapter, depends. But I just got done writing my sequel, the second book in the series for The Boy, the Cube, and the Elf. So that one's The Dwarf, the Book, and the Thief. And so that one, my deadline was coming up. So that one, I was more like crunching for a test. I was like, okay, house has got to just sit here unfinished for a little bit. And so that one, I sat down and just grinded it out in, like about a week. They are 30,000 words, so it's not like a huge long novel. I had already had a few chapters done prior to that, but I was like, I need to get this done. I had been thinking about it. The hardest part is you think about all these things and where you want to go with the story, and then you sit down to write and it goes a different direction than you initially. Like I'm more of a pantser. Like I do have some plotting tendencies because I think we all need to do that, because there's certain parts in a story that you have to have. But I kind of like to go where it takes me. And so one thing that happens to me is I have to go back and edit and make sure that everything is aligning and things aren't conflicting with each other. So this was the first time really crunching it out pretty fast, but it just, I have the majority of the series in my head. Now it's just getting it down on paper, adding those little nuances and character development and all that stuff.
Yeah. You are published by two different publishers, right? And Scrivenings Press is the one who's published The Boy, the Cube, and the Elf. I'm quite interested with how they are to work with, also because I understand they have a Scriv Kids program for kids to help them sort of improve their writing and get involved in that. You know,
So
yeah.
that's a pretty neat program. I haven't delved into it too much. So the Baba Yaga books, that's my publishing company. One of the things I did when I was researching was, hey, you should set it up as a company and stuff. So I published with them, but I wanted to see what it was like to be more traditionally published. So I went to a convention called Realm Makers. So it's kind of a Christian convention. And so I was pitching a couple different books. I was pitching 3 books at the time. It was The Social Score, which I'm going to publish myself now, Flick of the Switch, and then also The Boy, the Cube, and the Elf. And so I went to them and they really enjoyed the story. And they were just starting Scriv Kids at the time, so it's kind of an offshoot of Scrivenings Press. And so they've been pretty good to work with. So, we signed the contract, got all that stuff squared away, and like I said, for the second book, I kind of got crunched up. We ended up moving cross country to be closer to my parents. And, during that time, just chaos, hockey, kids, all that stuff. So they were good with kind of rather than pressuring me to get the draft out, they gave me like another month or so just because life got in the way, if you will. They've been really good to work with. I've enjoyed that. The editors have been really easy to work with. They've given me some great tips and advice as to how to work things and whatnot. It's been a good experience.
Excellent. Well, the other thing I'm usually curious about is the post-publication phase, the promotion and marketing. Have you found that to be significantly different publishing with Scrivenings Press versus your own company? Or is it more or less the same for an independent?
It's very similar. And I think that's the way the industry's going is you have to promote yourself, which like I said, most writers are introverts and you play an extrovert on TV. And so you got to try to figure out how to be that extrovert, how to do your marketing. They help out a little bit. They have their networking. They put my book and some of the other books at the end as an advertisement. They're on their website. I'm there. They publish me in a couple different locations, not just Amazon. their Facebook group, they're, promoting on that, but a lot of it is still on my own, so I'm trying to either use my Instagram or email marketing seems to be a big thing right now. So I'm trying to get my, feet dug in on the email marketing. And so that one's always a challenging one too, because it's time consuming.
But you did sound like you had some good reviews, so that's one of the big currencies on Amazon, isn't it?
Yeah, so that one I'm still working on trying to get some more reviews. So it's kind of a little slower. I didn't quite do I just don't want to burn out all my family and friends, so I didn't really pressure them or, really push to have them do reviews yet. So I'm trying to have those come trickle in here and there and just wanted to organically see how this one developed and try a different tactic on this one
Right.
than I had in the past.
Have you tried to get into your children's schools at all to present it there?
Yeah, so I've reached out to my younger ones because that's kind of more their age. Like my older kid is right on the edge of, they say 8 to 13 is about middle grade. And so I have a 13-year-old, 10-year-old. So the 10-year-old, I've talked about doing some things. This last year with moving was really difficult with having time to do all that stuff. This next year, I'm going to push hard to go to their book fair, see if I could do something with the book fair, and been looking at getting into some local libraries as well. Donated my books to some of the local schools, including my kids' school as well, just to get my name out there and get some exposure that way too.
So, well, I guess we'll move on to some of your books now. We'll get into a little bit of the details. But so
Sure.
The Boy, the Cube, the Elf is the one that I read. It's a fun adventure science fiction, as you said, middle grade children's story set. I guess it would be set in the distant future or a place far away in a time not now,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it's basically so it sounds like you had a lot of fun with this. You take, I think it's in the intro, says no spoilers, I don't think, but
Yeah.
you take a young boy, probably about 12-ish. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So he's pretty gifted in mechanical stuff, works with his
Mhm.
dad on the station. His mom's there as well. And then he's off doing something. His parents disappear, and this strange elf girl arrives, and the whole adventure starts. And he's trying to find his parents, and she's trying to find something else. And they're at each other all the time. They're almost like a young married couple, to be honest.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what inspired well, it's going to be a series. So what inspired this? Because you do have, as you already mentioned, the title for the second one, so it's not a surprise. You have elf characters, you have goblin characters. So it's like well, what did I say? Dungeons and Dragons in space for kids, basically, mixed
Yeah.
together.
Yeah. So I just thought it would be fun. I mean, it's not new, like everything's kind of regurgitated and just told a story differently. It's not the first time this has been done, but I kind of wanted to blend the sci-fi realm with fantasy. So I really like fantasy as well, but I wanted to kind of put it in a science fiction setting. And so what's happening throughout the series is as the titles kind of explains, no spoiler, as you read through it, you can kind of figure out where Nico's going, right? So he's probably going to be the wizard, and so the elf shows up, she's there. The next book has a dwarf and a thief. So you kind of see the theme that's going on. So each book is introducing new characters until you get kind of your classic band of fantasy heroes, and they're all on a quest, right? And so the quest is finding their parents and whatnot. And so it just goes through all these fun little adventures, different villains here and there. Each book has different things going on. And I just kind of wanted to have this like epic adventure, kind of like fantasy, but in space. And
Right.
so that was I was like, how can I weave this here and have some of the cliches kind of play out and have fun with it, but then have twists to it as well and something a little bit different here and there.
Yeah, because I thought it's I mean, a little bit of mashup. There's clearly some Star Wars
Yes.
references, Lord of the Rings in there, and then the
Yep.
cube makes you think of Avengers as well. So you're mashing
Yeah.
them all
Yep.
together. I was curious on the magic system, how well developed have you done with the magic system? Because Nico's magic, as you said, he already alluded to him being the wizard eventually, and the magic, but it's not. It's sort of at this point, without trying to give any spoilers, it's not coming across as something that's, let's say, in his control. So have you
And
fleshed out that you know how it's going to work once it gets going?
yeah, yeah. So it's kind of like how different stories have some sort of magical character. It always starts out that they don't know that they have this power. And then it's all about how to manipulate it, how to grow, how to figure it out. You look at the Harry Potter series, right? He doesn't know what he's doing at first. And then he starts to, he does go to wizarding school and he has that direction and goes that way. And so there's going to be things and people that kind of help him learn his skills and develop him throughout the story. I do have a direction that's going to happen, and how that happens without too many spoilers, it will develop. It's all about learning, right? We're not all masters when we start something. We have to go from baby steps to walking to running and so on and so forth.
Have you had your kids read it then?
Yes, yeah, yeah. So they think it's fun, so they enjoy it.
So you've got the approval from.
Yes,
Okay.
I have.
So I was curious about the elf character. I mean, you already explained sort of the influence of, let's say, fantasy and things like that. I guess I was just curious how you decided on the elf to be like this elf, for example. So what was the process of this character design?
Yeah, so the process of the character design is, kind of, I don't want to say, I'm trying to think exactly how to explain it. So kind of a little bit more of aggressive, kind of entitled. And later in the series, you'll find out kind of why with her background. And I don't want to spoil some of that stuff. But it just, for me, I think it's fun to create a dynamic where, she's kind of pushy. She thinks she knows it all, which kind of plays off of Nico being kind of naive, right? He spent his entire life on a space station and he doesn't have too much life experience, if you will, where she's kind of the opposite, right? She's, at least you think she's done all these different things and has this life experience and was, I don't want to necessarily say belittling him, but she's like, why don't you know this stuff? Like, and just kind of, and that helps the characters grow and it kind of plays off each other. And at some point, she's humbled too. And she doesn't know it all. She has certain breakdowns here and there. And I just thought it'd be a fun dynamic to have between the two characters as they grow and develop throughout the story.
And so you do have the second book almost ready?
Yeah, so the draft's done. It's with my developmental editor, so we'll see what they say and what she goes through and just trying to make sure that everything blends together, that I'm not missing things or throwing things in there, and then we'll move on from there. So, that was submitted in the last week in May, so I'm waiting to hear back on that one.
Excellent. That's a good segue into something I should have asked earlier, perhaps. But so what is your process when you go from writing to publication? Because you mentioned a developmental editor. A lot of independent authors who haven't reached the sort of
Sure.
regular workflow pathway don't necessarily know everything that's involved or necessary to get a book to that level. So what stages would you go through typically once you finish your drafts and you send it off to someone?
Yeah. Yeah, so the way I work is my wife is a crazy reader. She'll read a book a night. She has trouble sleeping, so she'll just read an
Okay.
entire novel, right? And so I will always go through her first. The first time I gave her a draft, it was kind of a surprise. I didn't tell her I was working on it. And she was like, oh, this is actually pretty good. She didn't know what she was getting into. And because she reads a ton, right? And so she's like, yeah, I've read some books that were really bad and I don't know how they got published. And so she was kind of impressed with how well I did. But, there was a lot of mistakes in there. And so she went through and kind of was like, well, this doesn't make sense because this and that. And, she was my developmental editor the very first time. And so she catches some stuff. And then she's really good with kind of wordsmithing as well. So, she made it high level in the Air Force. And part of that is doing all the paperwork. And we have officer training reports and performance reports. And so you have to kind of be a good wordsmith because you have a very small amount of space to put in what your airmen did. And so she got really good at that. And so real attention to detail. So all of my drafts go through her first. So, if someone has somebody like that, that's well read and, attention to detail, that's the direction I would go. And then for my other ones after that, after she got done with it, I would send it off to another editor, that I was paying since I was self-published and, just found some through the internet, through different avenues. I think I found some on Upwork. I found some other different places and whatnot. And then really typically I'll use her as the developmental editor and then the line by line editors and that kind of stuff. I'll pay for. But now with Scrivenings Press, Scriv Kids, they have an editor for all that stuff. So this will be fun to see how everything develops. So my first story, obviously, it was pretty much done. So they went through, it went through their secondary and then just the line editor with that. There wasn't really a developmental editor per se
Right.
the first time. So this time it'll be a little bit different having them do developmental editing with me.
Yeah, I'm looking at for my own books that are hopefully coming up soon. Pathways to finding editors and things like that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So curious, last question on The Boy, the Cube, and the Elf is what's your favorite character in the series so far?
I think I kind of latch on to Maddie the elf. She's just, she's kind of fun. She has this great backstory that nobody knows yet except me, but it'll be put out there eventually throughout the series. And she's just a fun character to write. She's kind of an antagonist, but she's always antagonizing Nico. And it's just kind of fun to, like, I'm a big tease. Like, I always tease my wife and the kids and stuff like that. And so it's kind of fun to write that kind of stuff in there where you just kind of poking the bear, so to speak, and then go in that direction and just developing the other characters based off of that. So I think she's my favorite character out of there. And Nico's a close second, obviously. So.
Right, right. So we did touch a little bit on the Flat Earth series. I think we won't have time to delve into that too much, but the one that I'm most interested in, and at the time of recording, it's not available yet, but at the time that this is airing, it will be
Mhm.
available, and that's Social Score, which is your newest novel that's coming out.
Yeah.
The tagline is, if your beliefs were punishable by death, would you keep them? It's like you're channeling a knowledge of the UK, to be honest, from reading the blurb. Modern
Yeah, yeah.
UK. What inspired this book? Was there a particular, without getting yourself in trouble for it?
Oh yeah, I don't think it's, it won't get me in trouble or anything, but just it's with every dystopian novel or movie, it's kind of government oppression and wanting to control everything and us not having freedom, right? So obviously I live in the US, I'm an American, like freedom is second nature, right? I joined the military and yeah, initially it wasn't for, it wasn't patriotism initially, right? But, over it, you're like, yeah, like I'd lay down my life for this country. I want the people to be free. I want us to have decisions. I want us to be able to make those dumb choices if that's how it works out and learn from our mistakes and just being able to have those options. And I saw the direction that things were going, and it just kind of seemed like everything was, more rules. Every year there's more and more rules. Eventually, it just kind of looked like we wouldn't be able to make any decisions ourselves. Everything is going to be pre-programmed, and you're a robot, and you have to do this and that. And so, like I said before, this was kind of like my ode to 1984, right? It's, he almost looks like a prophet writing that book. There's so many things in there when I went and reread it and got inspired by it again. And there's so many things you're like, oh man, it's kind of scary, as the way the things are going. And so I took that and that was kind of my inspiration and just what would happen if you were in an even more oppressive situation, that you couldn't make decisions and you couldn't even have beliefs. So me with my Christian background, like that's pretty solid for me. That's where I fall back on. And, what if that was challenged? What if I couldn't do that? What if I couldn't be with my family outside of my actual family? And so that's kind of where that came from and where it went to.
Yeah, because I mean, books like this always get compared to, as you mentioned already, 1984, Brave New World,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
unfortunately, you can probably add in the World Economic Forum playbooks or something.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
How much
Yeah.
did you draw on, well, of those and anything that's going on? Did you take your inspiration from there and then go in the direction for the story, or did you sort of, because I mean, obviously, I haven't read it yet. No one else except your
Yeah.
editors have read it yet, although I'm
Sure,
looking
sure.
forward to it. Did you pick elements as you see them and then incorporate them, or did you just take the idea and run with it?
Yeah, so I took the idea, like I said, 1984 was my big inspiration, but then I took things that were happening in real world. And then I also took inspiration kind of from the American Civil War, the oppression of the black people and basically having slaves and all that stuff. And so there was the Underground Railroad, right? So getting them up to the north, getting them free. And so I kind of took inspiration from that as well. And so that's kind of part of the book too, is, the main protagonist, he's gets caught doing something that is definitely illegal. And so he's on the run. And so through this system of this underground railroad, if you will, he's able to get out to freedom. And that's what he's trying to do. And, how things happen, what goes on. And throughout the story, you see different things that are happening today and are happening throughout the world, especially in the US where I am. And it kind of goes from that. So I drew on all sorts of stuff based on all that.
Right. Out of curiosity, I mean, you are based in the US. I'm based in the UK, and I'm also Canadian. So, I mean, you're military, so you probably keep track of, or former military, so you
Yeah.
have some understanding of the issues that are going on in the world as well. So,
Mhm.
if you were ranking, well, let's say the US, UK in terms of freedom versus the countries that are losing their freedom, I mean, where would you put the US, for example?
I think it's still pretty high, with the way things are going. You're still allowed to protest. You're still allowed to do a lot of things. You do have freedom. In some of the states, there's a lot more than some of the other ones. You get out from the cities and there's a lot more free reign. So I think it's still pretty high. It's just, it's a slippery slope, right? So as soon as you kind of give that control over to somebody, they want more and it just kind of goes down. And in some ways it's kind of like that frog in the boiling pot, right? Like it doesn't happen instantly, right? It's not some oppressive government takes over. It's kind of a slow burn and a lot of people don't realize it's happening and they're like, "Oh, that's okay, that's just that. Oh, that's okay, that's just that." And then more and more and it builds and then eventually you're boiled alive, and so that's kind of where it's going. So I would say it's definitely still one of the freer countries that I visited. So I did a year in Iraq, and so during that time, we were building up their forces and watching their culture, and I was an advisor to their officers because they were developing their air force, and so we were trying to teach them to be Americans, which had some advantages, but then some disadvantages too, because we were in some ways trying to teach them to be Americans, but they needed to be themselves, needed a blend of our system and their system. And so it was interesting just to see the development of that country. And, there was a lot of things where it was like they just all of a sudden they had this technology and they had access to the internet and they were like little kids with this new toy and you're like, whoa, 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 like relax. Like you need to set some of these parameters and not just go crazy with it. But they were making mistakes and learning from them, and it was a different environment. But at the same time, during that, when I was in Iraq, I got to, the Air Force pays for you to do a 15-day a mid tour. And so my wife's got Scottish heritage. So we went to Scotland. We got the rest of our family to go out there and went to Scotland and drove around all over the country for 14 days and had a lot of fun seeing all that kind of stuff. And, I draw on some of my inspiration with the fantasy stuff too, because it was fun seeing all those castles. And, you go to the East Coast of the US and you're like, man, this stuff is old. And then you go to Europe and you're like, wow, this stuff is real
Really
old.
old.
So yeah, it was great. It was a great vacation. And at the time, it seemed very free and kind of the same. So that's really all that I have to draw on is that experience and
Yeah.
being overseas from
Yeah,
it.
the boiling frog has been a metaphor for a while now, and it feels like recently we've turned our burner up to full in the UK,
Hmm.
at least in England.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't particularly think Trump is wrong in his assessment, to be honest,
Sure.
living
Yep.
here. Is this going to be a series, Social Score?
So I've had a couple people that read the book to ask if it was going to be a series. The way it ends, it could be. I had written it to be a standalone. So I have so many other projects that are series. So I think I'll just kind of let this simmer and, we'll see if it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, let's write a second one, let's go from there. But
Yeah.
as of now, it's just a standalone.
Yeah, I think we're drawing close to the end, and today, unfortunately, it's because I have to leave. But there's two big questions I have down just normally as one of my normal questions, but I usually end on a big question, and it kind of feeds into it. So this makes me think of the concept of techno-feudalism, which is being discussed in certain circles. I'm wondering if you look ahead like 200 years, if we let this go, because we have a lot of chaos going on in the world right now, geopolitical chaos. We've got then all the technology that's changing. So I mean, the boiling frog is not only gradually boiling, but it's confused as heck as well, isn't it?
Oh, yeah,
So it
definitely.
doesn't even know if it's in the water or not.
Yeah.
So I mean, at some time in like 200 years, if we got a techno-feudalist state, do you think could you foresee that, we're gonna have to fight to regain our rights, like Magna Carta type stuff and freedoms that the US has fought for? Some people will argue maybe sooner, but maybe I'm a pessimist in this. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think you're, kind of spot on. I think it's one of those things too. I believe as Mark Twain said, that history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme, and you kind of look at different things and, population explosions. And if you look at some of the details and whatnot, it seems like in the history of mankind, you'd have a population growth, especially of males, and then a war would come along, dwindle it down, we get back to normal numbers, and then we start building up again. And then the same thing would repeat itself. It's never the same war, it's never the same thing going on, but it repeats itself. And so you look at society and the history of mankind, and there's always something that happens, some sort of system that everybody's trying to buck. I mean, the United States, why did it become the United States? There was the Pilgrims, if you will, the first ones over here. They were oppressed. They felt oppressed and they looked for something different and were able to come out here and start something new. It's one of those things where, well, where's the next location we can escape to, right? And so you look at all the things that Elon Musk is doing with SpaceX and, is the next wave, is the next new America, if you will, is that space somewhere? Is it going out there and starting your own country there? And there's a lot of examples out there of things, people and cultures doing that kind of stuff, and so fighting back against some sort of villain that's not just one individual, but some sort of system is always there. And I totally see us doing it again, right? So just how exactly it happens, who knows?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to think on the male side of the population you mentioned as well, because I have kind of noticed that myself and wondered about it. You do kind of wonder, what's the cause and effect, right?
Yeah.
Because yeah, okay, male population increases, then typically war brings it back down, increase. And you just wonder, is that something inherent to males, or is that something inherent to power structures in order to reduce the number of males that would
Right.
challenge them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Keep those guys
Yeah.
busy so they don't take over the government, right?
Well, and every government does something different too, right? Like you look at China, and from what I've heard and research and stuff, like they have all these empty cities because they have so many males. They're trying to keep them busy. They really, I guess, they just build cities.
Build stuff.
Nobody lives there, but it's something for them to do to keep them busy, so that way they're not thinking, "Oh, my life sucks. I need to, go against this government or whatever."
It feels like in the Western, especially Anglo-Saxon countries, governments have kind of forgot this or something. They just sort of started trying to belittle the men into submission.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, interesting. I'm very curious. I'm very interested in sort of the future off-world as well. Like you say, if we
Mhm.
end up with, like, say, a rebellion or something, or settlements, maybe once the technology's worked out, we'll have the option of grassroots settlement on Mars or something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe, who knows, maybe Venus will become accessible somehow.
Yeah.
But you never know what, we still don't
Yep.
actually know what's on there completely. But
Yeah, exactly.
so the second question was related to that, but maybe more difficult because I'm going to give you a shorter timeline.
For sure.
So as we've mentioned, I mean, these are incredibly complex, fluid times right now, all this instabilities, right? The geopolitical instability, got all these technological developments, got AI, which we always talk about everywhere. Social unrest fed from a lot of this stuff. Some of it's grassroots, some of it's astroturfed. And all of these lead to economic instability and complete social and civilizational instability. One target year we hear, because I did mention the World Economic Forum earlier, is 2030. But many analysts, now I'm thinking that someone somewhere is hoping to stabilize things by 2030. Who knows?
Sure.
Many analysts are suggesting it's going to go on for a decade or two. So what I'm
Okay.
gonna ask you here is, like, let's say if it's 2 decades from now before we get any kind of stability, that puts us right in the middle of the technological singularity, basically. So this isn't necessarily a fair question because it is a singularity. But what do you think life might be like in 2050? I'll give you the other parts so you can pick and choose. So the second part would be, what do you hope it's like? And then what's one technology you'd love to see enter the average person's life, let's say by
Oh
2050?
boy, that is challenging, right? So
But it's a
yeah,
close time frame, so yeah, it makes it more difficult.
yeah, definitely. It's like everything everybody always wants to say is, yeah, I want it to be free. I want everyone to have their choices, you know. And like I said earlier, you know, if you make a bad choice, that's your choice still, right? Like I understand we want to be safe, and especially in the Air Force, I saw this throughout my career. In order to be safe, we stopped doing certain things. And then your training went from going out and shooting actual weapons to now we're just going to simulate it because we don't want anybody to get hurt. And it's, well, you know, is it worth even doing then? Because anybody can talk about it. What makes us the best is going out and performing. And when it gets to time, you can execute. You know, that's what I would want to see is just a lot of freedom. I think it's going to be a combination of the two, though, when we get there. I honestly would really like to see some, you said technology that any man could do. I don't want just movie stars or high net worth individuals go into space, right? I want to be able to see everybody be able to do it, right? And so, kind of that new age, if I want to go out and you look at the Oregon Trail in the US, anyone could go do that. You know, they had the option to go live on their own, to get away, to start off their own culture or their own city or their own environment, started with family and friends and that kind of stuff. And yeah, there were threats, you know, like nothing's super safe. You look at how many people died on the Oregon Trail trying to get out to the West Coast. And, you know, some stopped on the way, and that's where we got all our settlements. And I would like to see the technology that Elon Musk is working on to give us that option to be able to, you know, let's get on this spaceship and let's go to this new planet and be able to colonize it and you know, be able to start a different system or, you know, just be able to get away and maybe like Nico, you're the only one on the space station with your family, you know. So that would be the technology I would like to see be able to be integrated in everybody's lives.
So you mentioned your hope for freedom. Now, realistically, what do you think it might be like
So
if we keep
realistically,
going the
what
way
I
we're
think,
going?
yeah, I think it's going to be waves, right? So I think it's going to be a part where it's, you know, everything gets really oppressed, and then you have some individuals that stand up and fight, and you know, it's the cycle of war. You know, I and you said like 2050, what do you think it's going to be like then? You know, it depends on how long it takes to get through all this stuff. So I know it's kind of a vague answer, but I think there's going to be a period of oppression, and then it's going to turn around, and then there's going to be a little bit more freedom, right? I think there's a saying, I think it's from a book where it's weak men create weak times, strong men create strong times, and then the cycle repeats itself, right? And so, you know, like maybe right now we're at, you know, weak men creating weak times, and then that weak time is creating strong men, which will then create good times or strong times, you know, and so it's just a cycle. And I think where you hit it on there, you know, it could be good times, you know, by then. It's one of those things I have to do a lot more research on.
We can hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, I think there's a lot of cycles buried in this, isn't there? Because there's that cycle which I think is not balanced. It's probably mirrored. Maybe that's not even the right word. By the sort of freedom versus, like you said, freedom versus safety cycle as
Hmm.
well, right? Like you mentioned with the military, you know, we're now afraid to shoot weapons, live weapons, because, oh, in training, because maybe someone gets hurt or scared or something, right? You're like, well, how does
Oh
that
yeah.
prepare you for actual combat then, right?
Right.
And that's all over the place, and it makes resilient, like you say, weak people, and then they lose resilience, and then hopefully a generation realizes what's going on and they start training up the next generation. And so best case scenario, we're we're going to bring up the more resilient generation now,
Yeah,
hopefully.
hopefully, yes, yeah.
Yeah. So it has been great chatting with you. Unfortunately, that is about all our time for today.
I
But
really
before we
appreciate it.
go, maybe you can just let us know, give us some timelines for your upcoming books, because you have a few of them in the pipeline, where to find you online, and if you'll be in any upcoming events or anything.
Sure, yeah. So on the 21st is when my social score drops on Amazon,
That's
21st of
June.
June,
June.
25. Yeah. So this Saturday. So I was gonna kind of have fun with it. It's my 13-year-old's birthday on the 21st. So I was like,
Oh,
oh, I'll
okay.
just, kind of publish it then and kind of have fun and with that. So you can find me at authorbrentg.com. I shortened it as short as I could because, my last name is difficult. And that will tell you all the different books that I have coming out. This fall, I have Flick of the Switch coming out. And so that one's kind of it's a young adult military sci-fi adventure. The main protagonist is a girl who's kind of down on her luck, lives in a trailer park. And at the time, the government is trying to fund this secret organization. And so they buy her from her mother, who's, a drug addict, for $5 million. And they bill it as she's going to a video game school because she's really good at video games and really aggressive and stuff. And so what you find out throughout the book is it's a lot more than it seems. And so she's not just, at a video game school, it's a military school. And things progress from there. And so that's a fun little story. And that's going to be a series too. So I have the first one done in that series and working on the next one while I'm working on my other series too. So I kind of bounce back and forth between them. And so yeah, those are the best place. That's the best place to find me is my website.
Excellent. Brent Golembiewski, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I really enjoyed the conversation we had today.
And thank you for listening. Information and links related to this and all episodes are available at alternatefutures.co.uk. I'm also over at Substack under Alternate Futures, where I post articles on science fiction, socio-technological issues, and futurism. You can subscribe for free or sign up for a paid account if you'd like to support the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, why not share it with friends, writers, and other sci-fi fans you know? And if there are any indie sci-fi creators you'd like to see featured, send me a message at podcast@alternatefutures.co.uk. Once again, I'd like to thank you for listening, and I hope you'll join me on the next episode.
This is the future. Human error. Evolution. This is the future.